Hello, and welcome to the Dissident Mama podcast. Today, my guest is Mark Beck. Beck is the founder CEO, and now chairman of Bridgetree, a data management and analysis private company. Beck, who describes himself as anti-corporate, has used his management and operating skills and his financial resources to found American Classic Commercial Landmarks, a National Historic Registry property acquisition, restoration, and management venture. In other words, Beck buys old buildings and renovates them with historical preservation as a central focus. He has already completed two such projects, one in Mooresville, North Carolina, and the other in Charleston, South Carolina, and is currently working on his third, restoring the West Jefferson Hotel in Ashe County, North Carolina. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
So that gets a little wordsy. So we're going to break all this down and see what it is you're doing and why I think it's important. So tell us a little bit about why you consider restoration of historic landmarks, commercial properties that are old, perhaps abandoned, falling into disrepair. You have said in multiple places that it's your social mission to restore these. Why is that?
Well, it comes from a lot of places. First of all, I have an interest in it. I've always been interested in old buildings. Ever since I was a small child, I always used to notice older buildings. And so I have a basic interest. And then as I went on in life and got more successful, I was like most people that are financially successful, you get solicited for donations from all sorts of charities all the time. And one of the things that would happen is I would, in fact, donate to various charities, but then I'd start checking into them. And it seemed like the money never really went to the mission, or just little dips and drabs went. For example, the thing that really set me off some years ago, I was living in Charlotte and living a corporate sort of life. So I was recruited to help with the United Way, to raise money. So they'd send me out to various places to talk to people to raise money. Later that year, the executive director of the United Way was caught being driven around in a limousine, taking private jets to various parties in Los Angeles and Washington and wherever. And so I was out shilling for an entity that just basically took care of their immediate people. So I started looking more askance of charities, and I decided that it was not a good thing. And I decided I was going to do my own mission. And that became where I started doing preservation, because I think old buildings are fine and they need to be preserved.
And you have obviously business skills, business acumen. Well, how has those skills helped you translate to architectural preservation, in addition to you just thinking old buildings are cool? What have you picked up along the way? Are you just hiring really great people? But how much oversight do you have in exactly the architectural improvements?
Well, I wouldn't say they're improvements.
Okay.
They're generally going back to what they were.
Okay.
So you do the best thing you can to get the original architecture plans, and if you don't have them, you try to replicate them. And then if you go back to generally the first or original architect's design and start recreating it, the building comes alive. So generally the original plans were the best. And what happens to an old building over time is they get retrofitted, the ceilings get dropped, they add windows, they subtract windows, they do all sorts of things that gum up the whole visual aesthetic of the building. And so the task of preservation is pretty much simply taking the building back to what it looked like, while hiding all the modern things that you need for a modern era building in places that people can't see. So it's a highly technical project to do this. I have a mind that likes technicality, and I like big hairball projects. So it suits my way of seeing things. So do most of it. I hire architects, of course, and engineers and electrical, this and that, MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. But I pretty much have a real hands-on approach to it.
Okay. And
I
as
do
far
the
as,
design myself, by the way, interior design. I like doing that.
and that's just something you've picked up over the years, and also answer that for me, but also how do you find out what the original looked like? Is that just digging in public records and finding old blueprints and things or pictures?
Generally, old buildings, particularly if they're more than a century old, don't have blueprints.
Okay.
So you start with generally an architect that measures everything, and you create what's called an as-built. Then you start studying the as-built, and you start digging around the building looking for ghosts. Now, a ghost is not the kind of ghost that most people think, although they do claim in the local community that the old hotel is haunted.
Okay.
Might be, who knows? But the ghosts that you look for are shadows of paint, strips of paint, strips of wallpaper, indentations in walls that tell you that something has changed.
Hmm.
So when you see something that's changed, then you start investigating it further. And the building, as you investigate, the ghosts, the ghosts are just things from the past. The story starts all coming together.
So
It's really fun.
it's almost a little bit like archaeology too. So instead of digging in the earth, you're digging into buildings. That's,
Well, there's a name for that. They actually call it forensic architecture.
well, there you go. That
And
sounds
actually,
awesome.
the real good people at it can tell you things based on how the lumber is even sawn. Because at one point in time, it went from having just a handsaw going up and down to circular saws. That was sometime in the 1870s, I believe.
Okay.
So buildings that are older have a different pattern of sawing versus newer ones.
Interesting.
Oh yeah,
So-
there's all sorts of little tricks.
So you're just picking up all this, and as far as interior design goes, did that just come from, putting stuff in your own home?
No, not at all. I have lived in North Carolina and South Carolina. I live in South Carolina now, but I lived in North Carolina for many years, and I worked in the marketing and advertising business. And part of that business was servicing home furnishing companies like the Thomasville Furniture or Henderson, which were based in North Carolina. So I spent an enormous amount of time looking at sets for photography. And so what you do is you'd set up rooms and then photograph them. So they'd have to be very aspirational or nobody would buy the furniture.
Okay.
So I just got a sense of design from doing that for 20 years.
Now you've lived in the Carolinas, North and South Carolina for quite a long time. Was it your master's at Wake Forest?
That's correct.
But you are a Michigan boy. That's where you were born and raised, and went to the University of Michigan. So one of the obvious questions I think for my viewers would be, how does a guy with these Michigan roots, you told me that you do have Civil War ancestry and that they probably fought for the Union. So why is this a thing for repairing and restoring houses in the South? Is it just because you live here, or is there something else to it?
Well, I'll give you a little story. First of all, I'm from what you'd call a heritage American. I'm a heritage American. And what that means is just like the people up here in Ashe County, if you ask them where they're from, they say America.
Mm-hmm.
They've been around here so long, they don't even know what their real, true European ethnic heritage was. My family is the same way in Michigan. We have no clue what our ethnic background is outside that it's a big mixed up, jumbled up mess from being here for a long time. So that's the one thing. So I'm a heritage American. The second thing is I'm in a mixed family. I'm from the North. My wife is from the South. So my relatives fought on the Union side from Michigan. Her relatives fought on the Confederate side from North Carolina. So we're like what you call a mixed marriage.
I like it.
We get along.
Right,
We made nice children.
right. And people like me who were born in the South and have lived there, I welcome people like you who are Northerners, but you are, a Southerner through living here and appreciating it and, loving what's great about it. So, because we've got enough Southerners born and bred here who spend all their spare time tearing down history and beautiful things while you spend your time and money building them up. So thank you for
Yeah,
doing that.
I focus on the two Carolinas, and there's a business reason as well as a interest reason. First of all, I live here.
Mhm.
These are part of my spaces. It's part of my family's heritage, these spaces. And so I'm doing as much as I can to preserve the uniqueness of the towns and the culture. And that's often reflected through the buildings. So that's first and foremost. And then, of course, I'm a business guy. So I pay taxes in both of the Carolinas. If you do historic preservation, restoration, and you do it the way they want you to do, which is a whole set of rules that ultimately roll up to the U.S. Park Service, if you do it the way they want you to do, and those ways actually are pretty good, you get tax credits, which help offset some of the taxes I pay, both federal as well as state. So that helps mitigate some of the extreme costs of some of these projects.
Well, let's talk about some of the projects. I've read that you have a goal to do 5 of these restoration projects within your lifetime. You have already completed 2. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
All right. The first one is in Mooresville, North Carolina, which I believe is outside of Charlotte, for a building that was constructed in 1903. Can you tell us the name of the building, why you chose it, perhaps its historical significance that drew you to it?
Well, the reason I'm in that building, and the name of the building, believe it or not, is the Bridgetree building, which is the name of my company.
Ah, okay.
And I needed some space. I got into working remotely before it was popular. So 25 years ago, when I started the company, I started in a bedroom at my house in South Charlotte. And I always thought I would get an office and go corporate again. And after I was there for about 6 months and I had a little baby, my first little daughter, it stuck in my mind. I said, why the hell will I want to drive a hunk of metal down a freeway to go up a tube into a high rise to work? It just seemed stupid. So I decided I was going to just from there on work at home. And as the place got busier, I just made everybody work home. And we connected to the internet. And at the time it was radical. I actually had Wake Forest study it to figure out how to scale it. Nobody had ever scaled a company beyond 8 people at that time. And they were somewhat helpful, but you couldn't come up with answers. So we had to make it up. So eventually the business got a couple hundred people, and we needed a meeting place. So I thought, what better thing to do to get a commercial historic building and turn it into a meeting center for the company. So that's how I got Mooresville. Mooresville building was originally a dry goods store. It's about 10,000 square feet. It's a beautiful building right on the main street, the main part of the historic area. And it's a classic late 19th century building. It's a great building.
I haven't seen pictures of that. I'll have to look around, and if I can find any or you can share them with me, I'll
It
put
has a
this.
very popular restaurant in the front.
Oh, can you say the name of it?
Yeah, Dulcet and Delish.
Okay.
Very, very popular. It's only open during the day. And
All
that
right,
was put in there to help service the building, but then the locals got onto it, and now it's more popular with the locals than it is on the inside.
Oh, well, that's a good thing. So
Yeah,
I know more about your Charleston restoration. It is the One Broad Street building. Is that the name of it? One Broad Street?
yep.
Okay. And
Famous building.
yeah, so constructed in 1853, and it has a pretty fascinating history I know a little about. So why don't you dive into telling us about that? Why is it so historical in your view?
Well, it's been always the center. It's first of all, it's at the very central part of the historic district, and it sits across the street from the last building built in America by the British, which is called the Old Exchange, and it was the customs house for Charleston. So right across the street in 1853, the successful bank at the time, State Bank of South Carolina, wanted a new office. So they bought up 3 parcels and constructed this phenomenal antebellum brownstone bank building. And it's one of 2 brownstones in South Carolina. I don't think there's any more in the South that I know of, because they had to bring the brownstone in by boat from Connecticut. But it was an elaborate building in the day. It ultimately became one of the banks that helped fund the war effort for the South. Its president was the Secretary of the Treasury for the Confederate States. The building was heavily shelled during the Civil War from not Fort Sumter, but from I think Wagner, Wagner Battery Wagner in Fort Johnson by the Union. Got hit by several parrot round shells. The holes are still in there when I left them in there when I restored it. And it's just a fantastic building. And then since then, it went into other things where it was the first telephone exchange for the South. It was a weapons storage for a militia that was the red shirts that helped with the 1878 or 1876 election, where Wade Hampton got elected and the Reconstruction stopped in South Carolina. It was the center of the phosphate industry and a lot of pollution in the Charleston area, neck area. And it was always just a center place for cultural and commerce. And then it
That,
went into disrepair and I repaired it.
so when you bought, oh, and didn't it burn down? I mean, it seems like all old buildings burn down at least once, but it had withstood an earthquake and a fire, and then
It
it was abandoned.
burned in the Civil War. Then it got repaired. There was still Civil War damage, burns in the building when I repaired it in 2014. It went through the hurricane, or not, several hurricanes. It went through the earthquake, and the Union at the time had an office for the U.S. Signal Corps there that became the center of earthquake study for Charleston and the nation. And they used
Wow.
the building as a beta site for how do you mitigate earthquake damage in a commercial building, and that beta site mitigation is still there. So
That
very
is,
elaborate set of earthquake rods.
wow. I mean, it's like the scales, or like layers of an onion. I already thought it was a pretty fascinating historical building, but there's so much more to the story.
Well,
So,
there was 22 layers of paint.
whoa,
And I sat there and I scraped the paint with a razor blade and looked at it under a microscope. And that's how I found the original paint colors.
that is amazing. So, all this history, but it had been abandoned. I mean, was it just sitting there, an empty shell?
It was an empty shell. It wasn't abandoned. It was owned, but it had
Okay.
not been occupied in 10 years. And it was a victim of the Great Recession.
Mhm.
So it could no longer be a bank because it did not have a drive-through.
Oh,
So the bank got bought up by a big out-of-town bank, and it got conglomerated away, and eventually they didn't want it anymore. So they sold it to a local real estate investor, and he was going to turn it into high-end condos. So he stripped it, and then 2008 hit. They all went broke, and it went into a deep sleep. And then I came along in 2014 and bought it.
Now, the job there, the project is complete.
Yes, it is.
So what is the building today?
I could not keep it a bank because no banks wanted it. It's not functional for a modern bank. So I converted it into a restaurant space on the first floor, and it's a very popular restaurant, called Brasserie La Banque, a French restaurant. The second floor, which was a library for young men to keep them on the straight and narrow pre-Civil War, is now an event space. It's really a beautiful space.
Excuse me.
And then the third floor I took and I put an apartment there and I use it as my house.
Wow. Yeah, and there's
Great
a
apartment.
excuse me. Sorry, I got a little scratch in my throat, but there's a website that I found on I guess maybe you sent it to me, maybe I found it myself. It doesn't matter, but all about the history of the building, and it has some really good pictures about what it looked like in the past and today. So I'll be sure to link to that as well. So let's move on to the West Jefferson Hotel, also known as the Historic Old Hotel. I guess that's maybe what locals call it. So why did you choose this? What's your relationship to West Jefferson, North Carolina?
Um, I grew up on a farm or in a farm area in Michigan, and I always wanted to be a farmer. But my parents, I was the fourth of 8 children. My parents didn't have enough money for farming. We owned very little land. So if you don't start out with land, it's very hard to be a farmer as a young person. So as I got into corporate doing the marketing and advertising and selling and all that stuff, I saved my money up and invested it. So I got to a place that I could actually have a farm. So I decided I wanted to buy a farm. So 21 years ago, I bought a farm in Ashe County, which is where West Jefferson is. So through the years, I'd go to West Jefferson, and I always liked the town, but it was kind of run down. And the West Jefferson Hotel was the main building, and it's a really well-known building up in this area, and it's beloved. They call it the old hotel. And I inquired one time in town if any buildings were for sale, and the hardware owner across the street said, "A matter of fact, that one is right there," and he pointed to it. So I called the owner and I purchased it.
Wow. So you had been up there for
21
years.
years.
Wow. Okay.
So I have a personal connection to the area.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit more about the historical significance. You had said it has a long-standing role in the community going back to Roosevelt and the Blue Ridge Parkway and liquor running on buses. So what does that all mean?
Well, and this is you kind of scratch for layers. It's real interesting with old buildings. The nice things, the nice histories are easy to find. The bad histories are hidden. The bad histories are more interesting.
Right.
If that makes sense. So
Yeah.
in this building, there's a lot of, like every old building, there's a lot of mythology and stories, and the local people, just like at Broad Street, they have a real affinity and a personal relationship with the building that's apart from the owners. It's theirs. They view it as theirs. It's their community. So as I started scratching around, I found that the building was at the beginning of town, when the town was made, and they made the town to get around the original town, which was Jefferson, because they were putting a railroad in to timber the area. The railroad is since gone, but it was called it's called the Virginia Creeper Railroad, which is its nickname. And it ran right into West Jefferson, and right there they built a hotel. So what would happen is the railroad opened up the backwoods country in the remote area between Abington, Virginia, and Todd, North Carolina. It was extremely remote, but it opened up those areas so that the people that were back in the hills and hollers actually had a way to move around. So they would come on the train, they would come to town, they would stay at the West Jefferson Hotel, which also included a bank, a post office, a barber shop, and the town library. Oftentimes they would get at the hotel, and then the hotel owner owned a bus line and they would take the bus out of the area and go to Baltimore or Washington or some other place, and they would leave and never come back. So it was kind of like a Ellis Island in reverse, because the whole area depopulated for many years. The bus line was established in the late 1920s by the hotel owner who was E.O. Woody, who was a real operator. I wouldn't say gangster is not the right word, but he was a real good businessman. And he had the whole place wired. He was very good friends with the congressman who was Robert Dalton. Robert Dalton was the congressman who was the head of what was the House Ways and Means Committee, but I don't think they called it committee back there. It's House Ways and Means something or another. So he controlled the purse for the U.S. because he was the head of the Ways and Means Committee. He engineered getting the Blue Ridge Parkway moved into Ashe County out of Tennessee. So they moved it east in trade for Dalton supporting Social Security for Roosevelt. Part of the whole operation was E.O. Woody was his guy on the ground in Ashe County, because E.O. Woody had the buses and knew all the back roads. So when the congressman was in the area, E.O. Woody would drive him around, and oftentimes the congressman would stay at the WJ Hotel. So there's a close relationship. Somehow the E.O. Woody ended up with a monopoly on the bus lines in 4 states. Just happened.
Yeah.
So then you start looking at the bus lines, and then you start seeing the industrial scale stills, liquor making that was going on up in Ashe County. And there's plenty of pictures of them. They weren't just little hillbillies in the creek with a little still. They were giant stills. They were importing sugar from Cuba. So they were making liquor here. E.O. Woody and the buses were the distribution line. So as they were taking passengers, the cargo hold was full of liquor. Wow. And it was running to Washington, Columbia, Memphis, Charleston, Charlotte, Raleigh, Nashville, you name it. They were running it all over the place. So he became highly successful. And when he sold the bus line in the late 1950s, he was the wealthiest man in the whole high country.
Wow. So
very colorful character.
Yeah. And so the hotel at this point is flourishing. It's a very important aspect to many things. What happened from then on out to the building?
E.O. Woody loved horses, and he bought a train load full of horses that were wild from out west. They pulled him into West Jefferson. He let them off the train. They ran all over town. He then said, "I'll show you how to break a horse." He jumped on the back of a horse, and it was bucking around town. It threw him. He bumped his head, and he was never right afterward. And from that day forward, the hotel started going downhill. And that was in the early 1960s. So the family, they, like most old buildings, at some point, people quit maintaining them or investing in them. And so the investment stopped, and the harvesting of the asset continued through rents, but they didn't keep the maintenance up.
Okay, so by the time you are buying the building in what year?
Yeah, I think it was about 2019.
Okay.
Maybe 18.
You had told me that the local community had forgotten how grand the building was and how important it was and is. So is that kind of what you stepped into, give us a glimpse back to just, it was ignored. People didn't know the history, they didn't care. Perhaps the Woody family, didn't talk about how it was such a landmark part of that town. I mean, give us a glimpse as to
Woody family. Like. The Woody family was headed by a widow, an elderly widow, and a lovely, lovely lady. And the family was the widow and her 3 daughters. So they didn't have any grandchildren. And there were no errors of any sort. And the Woodies loved the building. It was a source of pride. They had a desire that it become a hotel again, but they didn't have the money.
Yeah.
So I came along and said, I'll take it back to being a hotel. So they said I was sent by Jesus. Mrs. Woody tells me I was sent by Jesus to save the hotel.
So,
And
what was in it though when you had it? I mean, was there anything?
there is a popular restaurant
Okay.
and a bunch of small little businesses, and the rents from the leases didn't pay the maintenance.
Okay.
So the Mrs. Woody was going slowly broke owning it.
Got it.
So what happened is I stepped into a hornet's nest because the restaurant was owned by a local business guy who was the head of the Chamber of Commerce. And the restaurant was using most of the building, even though they only rented 2,500 square feet. They were using 9,000 square feet. So when I purchased the building, I purchased it with the intention of restoring it. I had a meeting with the restaurant and said I was going to restore it, so they're going to have to leave. They recorded the meeting, which I later found out and was offended by. But that aside, a week after the meeting, I got served with a lawsuit and the claim that they had a 30-year lease. And it was like it's like I stepped in a hornet's nest, because the Chamber of Commerce was then weaponized against me. So I had to take on half of the town legally, and then and they used social media because they had a huge social media following from the restaurant. They used social media to say I was out of town and I was taking their hotel, destroying everything, terrible things. And they just broadcast this all over the place, to the point that I got threats of personal violence against me and my family. The man that helps on the farm didn't want to mow the hay because he was afraid he was going to get shot.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it just got him in a lather. And I had no social media presence in the community, so there's no way I could fight back. So all I could do is just go through it with the legal challenge, and that's what I did.
And you had a good relationship with the Woodies. You had been there 20 years, but they were kind of painting you like as a carpetbagger, this outsider's coming in and trying to ruin something that is good.
Yes, they painted me as a giant, cold-hearted businessman.
Yeah.
And I was coming into town, taking their hotel. And they had painted an image of me, and in the space of a week, I went from being unknown in the community to known everywhere.
Right.
So if I walked down the street, people would actually come up to me and cuss at me. I mean, they would call me every name in the book. I mean, it was pathetic.
Hey, Mark, bookmark it right there. We're going to take a little break, and we'll pick
40 minutes.
Yep. And we'll pick back up with all you being called dirty names on the street. All right. See you in a sec.
See you. Bye.
Okay, Mark. So you were talking about some of the intrigue surrounded around you concerning the West Jefferson Hotel, and people were recognizing you on the street and not being very friendly to you. So pick up there.
Yeah. So the legal challenge was not very good on their part, because they didn't really have a lease. But you can sue anybody for anything, or make a claim and sue them. Then you have to prove it in court. So the fact that it didn't really have a valid lease didn't stop them from suing me, but it put it in the court system.
Okay.
So one of the things that I learned from this, and I always kind of knew this, is a lot of power controls people through the court system and legal lawfare that may not be fair, right, or truthful, but is effective if you let it be. So I got served with a lawsuit, as did the Woodies. Mrs. Woody was sued too.
Oh, man.
Yeah, drug the poor widow in. It just really, really affected her. And so I could have sued Mrs. Woody back, but I chose not to because that would be not right. That's what my lawyers recommended that I do. But I didn't take that advice, and I'm glad I didn't. So I just decided I would fight. So I hired, like I do, I hired the 2 local law firms to tie up the talent in town. That lasted about 3 days. One of the law firms resigned because they said I was not the kind of client they wanted, and that I had a bad attitude and wasn't a Christian.
Okay.
So I was resigned by that law firm. The other law firm was pressured by the local bank to drop me as a client. And if they didn't, the bank would never do business with them again.
Wow.
So this just kind of gets at how communities, small communities, even when you're trying to do a good thing, how they can be wired to stop a good thing. So at any rate, knowing what I know, I parachuted legal talent into town and just blasted them. The thing went to a local judge. The judge suggested, or the lawyer suggested, we have a standstill order and not make any changes until the judge ruled, which I thought, well, that's fine. What I didn't anticipate is the judge would not rule.
Is that
So
normal?
you get in, anything can happen in a courtroom. So at any rate, the judge kept dragging along on a real simple case on the merits of the law. The law couldn't be any clearer on the merits. And he kept delaying ruling. And when we did have any kind of legal thing in the courtroom, the other side would actually pay people to show up. So it looked like there was a huge community effort against me, and me and Mrs. Woody would sit by ourselves on one side. The other side would have 50 or 60 or 80 people. So it was an intimidation thing toward the judge, who's an elected official. So he just quit ruling. And eventually I ended up having to force the issue, which made the local TV news.
Now, how did they have the money to be paying these people? It's just local power and politics and Chamber of Commerce kind of thing, because they do wield so much power that oftentimes is at odds with localism. Explain that. How did that happen?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that the local, again, it kind of goes back to what I started with the charities. A lot of the local institutions are all about preserving local power. And if you step outside of that and challenge that in any way, even in a nice way, like restoring a derelict landmark at the center of town, the whole system can go into gear against you. So where they got the money, I don't know.
Interesting.
But the one thing, and this is just for the audience, I've been in a few legal scrapes through my life, so I have a way of doing it. I've got a very expensive law degree without a diploma.
Ah.
Oh, yeah. You do businesses, you eventually get sued.
Right.
And so I have experience with it. So I always have a way of judging lawfare or legal things. And I always estimate the resources on the other side versus the resources I have. And if it isn't overwhelming on my side, I will settle and get out of it as quick as possible, because you're going to lose. If it goes the other way and my side has way more resources, all you have to have is resolve, and eventually you'll win. So I decided I had more resources than the local bank, as well as the Chamber of Commerce people, and I just had a resolve, and I said, I'm going to win. So I blasted them.
You had said that this story is about Well, the story brought out every Gothic and modern character into a drama that is purely America today. And I thought that was a really interesting way, because it was the small scale thing, even though it was very huge to you and Miss Woody and the people of West Jefferson. But you see this happening at large now in lots of places where a lot of outsiders come in too, and then use huge banks and huge law firms that cannot be beat. So can you kind of parse out what you were saying, how it was a drama that is purely America today from your experience, and then maybe how you see it playing out in other places?
Well, there one of the more funny things is there was a whistleblower,
Oh,
and the whistleblower was an employee of one of the other people.
okay.
She was sexually assaulted and then was fired because she didn't stand up for the employer, supposedly. So then she ended up rigging it where she was an Uber driver and she went out to pick somebody up. She put her phone on record and was then sexually assaulted again, and it was all on phone recorded.
And by
And
who is doing the sexual assaulting?
the brother-in-law of one of the other people.
Okay, I
So
see.
it brought all sorts of like little local stuff that was going on that was pretty unbelievable. And that was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So there was just all sorts of little things going on. As I said, I had my property taxes challenged. I own a farm up here and I've been paying taxes 21 years, and suddenly I got a property tax challenge. I got a letter in Charleston was sent by somebody up here trying to get the Charleston Post and Courier to do a negative review on me and the restaurant in my building in Charleston.
Hmm.
I had all sorts of little things going on all the time, little assaults, and I decided it was intimidation to try to make me just give up.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
so
when your resolve comes into play, right?
you have to, when you get into something like this, you have to be resolved. And I have a saying, I always finish anything I start. And that's a very useful thing in preservation, because these historic preservation restorations are hairball projects with full of unknown things. So you have to make sure you're in it, and so that's the way I was. Eventually, the way I got it unstuck in the court system was very dramatic. The restaurant was hanging in there. They had not an enforceable lease, but I couldn't let them go because we had this standstill order supposedly at the court. And so I wasn't able to evict them. So then on their day off on a Monday, I decided I was going to remove the patio. So I and the restaurant was using the patio, and it's where they made most of their money through liquor sales. So I got a construction crew with a backhoe, showed up Monday morning, and we smashed the whole patio and even cut the trees down. The whole town, it was like a parade of people driving by watching us do this. And the restaurant manager stood in front of the bulldozer. So I had to call the local police, and it was a test of authority. I told the police that they had to remove him. He said he had a lease, and the police took him away.
Wow.
So that was when the patio was smashed up and removed, is when I really, by all means, took control of the building. But after that, the judge, they ran to the judge. I got sanctioned. And then there was a whole bunch of other rigmarole. And then I told him I was going to take out the other area. They ran to the judge again, and he finally fried out and he ruled in my favor.
Now, this is the same judge that before was just mom is the word.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it took a while, but eventually I kept prompting issues and things which forced the other side to run to the judge. And finally he fried out and he ruled my way.
Now, the lease, the tavern owner was saying there was a 30-year contract or something. I mean, what exactly, like was the lease, I mean, how did, is it because you bought the whole building that the lease expired, or, I mean,
Well,
explain that to me. I don't understand.
there's a rule in North Carolina. It's a unique state. It's called a pure race state, and race has nothing to do with race, but
Okay.
it's a real estate term. And so if you buy a property that's leased, if the lease is not recorded on the deed, it's not enforceable.
Okay.
So this was never recorded, and in fact, there was some other issues with the lease, so it was not recorded. They tried to record it, and the local register of deeds refused because it was not notarized,
Uh,
and so it was not recorded. So it was a real clean cut thing, and that's just the law.
Now, in addition to the fact that this tavern was using way more space than they were supposed to be, they had this flimsy to non-existent lease. Was it because you wanted to convert the whole thing back into a hotel? I mean, would you have been willing to work with them at some point, like most hotels have restaurants? Like, how does that stand now? You know, well, how are you getting along with this tavern owner, I guess is the question.
Well, the restaurant has a new owner, and we get along fine.
Okay.
And the new owner actually called me up and asked for some forgiveness, which is fine. I like to get along with the locals, and I took that as a sign of a change of climate in the area. But oh, I lost my train of thought there. Ask that question
I guess
again.
the question is, the tavern is still going to be there, yes, just under new management, but they have to deal with, you restoring it, which I guess
Oh,
was the original guy's beef, other than
well,
maybe
the
just not
original,
liking you.
to restore a building, you do have to empty it out.
Yeah.
So I always and would have relocated them. Hell, I would have bought a building for them. But they chose to sue me instead.
I got it. Yep.
And so, I had no thing but fight. So the money I would have spent helping them, I spent on legal fees.
Again,
You don't want to have bad relationships with people, it's
right.
just not a good thing.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, you're trying to, you're not tearing down an old building. You're trying to restore an old building that is so important to that town. I wonder what it was, especially if you were willing to work with them. Is it because people in that part of North Carolina just tend to be clannish and you weren't from there? Or, do you have any guesses as to why? Did he just not like the cut of your jib? What was
It's probably the latter.
it?
And the reason I'm an anti-corporate person. I'm not a
Right.
person. I don't play golf. I'm not a country club member. It's just not me. And so, I kind of live, as one of my employees told me, he said, "You live like a peasant." I actually have a word for myself. I call myself a wily peasant, because I somehow, the wily peasant part is I somehow end up being successful, but it's almost always not conventional, because I
Okay.
just don't play by the same set of rules. I don't try to get promoted or any of that stuff. So at any rate, wily peasant, like they just were just from a different tribe. Now, the interesting thing about it, there was a class thing for sure that went on with this fight. The working people, which are most of the Ashe counties, the old Ashe Countyans, they wanted that hotel restored, but they had no power. They're just working people. The newer people, which some people they call them summer people, they liked the restaurant and liked associating with the elite. So they sided with the elite. So during the fight, it was kind of like the old Ashe County people were happy that somebody was fighting. So I had a great amount of support with the old Ashe County heritage people. There was a huge amount of support. And ultimately, when I won, they were happy as they could be, because I stuck it to the man, as some of them said.
So the summer people, I'm familiar with them. My mother-in-law lives up in Western North Carolina, and the summer people often are not from North Carolina at all and have no roots there. Did a lot of these summer people, were they outsiders, but they had maybe lived there a decade, or they just come, when it's super hot down in Florida, which
As
is typically where they're from.
the local town leadership of West Jefferson was highly supportive of me from the beginning. So I
Okay,
never was at odds with them.
good.
But as they said, the people that are fighting this don't vote here.
Got it.
And most of them were out of towners.
Right.
It was very odd. It was odd.
So back to the statement you had told me once, that this is a drama that is purely America today. Yes, so they're passing themselves off.
There's another aspect to it that was funny. Again, I'm kind of a street fighter type. I don't mind fighting. I was a wrestler in high school, heck, so I always kind of like to fight. But then, and I still like a good fight to this day. But the local bank was a tiny little bank, but it was a public company.
Hmm.
So they joined the lawsuit against me. Imagine that, a public company joining a lawsuit against me. So I got their financial reports and studied them and figured out that they were smaller than the resources I had. So then I went out and I bought shares in their stock and became a shareholder.
Wow.
And I didn't do anything with that, but I would have. So, you just fight every which way you can. And that's what it takes to redo some of these things.
I wasn't going to ask you about this because I didn't think it was going to be apropos, but you had said that there's a big difference between a public company CEO and being a founder CEO of a private company. But I think this does have to do with it now, because you are the private founder CEO. And explain to us who don't quite know the difference, like what's the bad deal with, a public company?
Well, first of all, I'm not CEO of Bridgetree anymore. I retired, so I'm chairman.
That's right.
So I don't run the company anymore. 21 years was enough.
Okay.
And so I'm happy to be retired. And if I was not retired and somewhat inactive, I'd never be able to restore these buildings.
Right.
So, but what I found along the way is the original founder CEO is an entrepreneur type, and they're generally fighter types. There can be highly disagreeable people, but they get their way and they have a vision and they pursue it. And against many odds, they sometimes win. And when they win, they own the place. A public company CEO is an employee. He's an hired agent of other people that own it. So to get into that chair, it takes a lot of political skills. So the most of the large CEOs are really politicians. They act like they're not, but they really are. So the uneasiness between a public company CEO and a founder entrepreneur CEO is generally the founder entrepreneur CEOs far more independent and generally wealthier. But their organizations are usually smaller.
Okay.
So the public company CEOs always describe these other characters as lucky rubes. They look down on them because generally the founder CEO type is not a politician. They're generally a doer. Have to be.
Yeah. So
does that make sense?
Yeah, this translates over to your experience in West Jefferson, where like you weren't going along with the program, you were doing things unconventional, like you've said, that was kind of your style. And I guess people who like that system don't like it when people come up and muss it up.
No, they're not necessarily welcoming. As I said, I was more welcomed by the Communist Chinese Party when I opened an office in Jin, China, than I was by the business leadership of Ashe County when I bought the hotel.
Well,
I've never been invited to a single party, by the way. Not that I would go.
Right. But the granddaughters of E.O. Woody, I saw a picture of y'all on Facebook hanging out, being happy together. You know, you have a good relationship with their mom. They stuck by you. A lot of the not summer people of West Jefferson supported you. So this is ending. It's a happy ending to the story. Yes.
It is a happy ending, and it's becoming a happy ending in the town. The differences are gradually, the edges of them are gradually smoothing out. The bank guy still won't bank me or talk to me or make a call on me or anything. The Chamber of Commerce ignores me, but they're just a small little clique.
Yeah.
But the rest of the town is celebrating this. And what's happened is, since the hotel is coming back and it's visual, it's very visual, and the building is grand. It has 13, 14-foot ceilings in some of the spaces.
Wow.
And when I bought it, they had drop ceilings, so everybody thought it had 8-foot ceilings. It's a grand building. It's a great building. But as it comes back, the whole town is rejuvenating. So the other two large buildings in town, I noticed this past week, both have building plans for complete restorations.
Nice.
So the whole town is coming up. And I think the hotel played a big part of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. You know, so doing things your own way, having the resolve that you have and determination. I think that's a great ethos to have, and we all need more of that. We working class, normal, everyday American people, heritage Americans. So can you tell us some of the lessons you learned in addition to what you've already said, and maybe advice to how we can all do kind of what you do, but in our own spheres, you know, not giving up when the powers that be try to keep us from doing something that we know is good for our community or for our family?
Well, the few lessons is, first of all, the big thing is to try to be independent. Anybody, if you gain some more additional independence in your life, it's going to make your life better, because you won't have to go along with BS. So the way to be independent is to avoid debt. So I don't have debt. I don't ever use debt. I don't like debt. I don't like people telling me what to do. So how do you do that? Well, you save your money. You have a budget, you save your money and you invest it, and eventually compounding does its magic. And some odd years later, you got plenty of money. So you do that. You do what you can to manage the amount of taxes that the system takes from you. And there's many legal ways to do that. And then you just have resolve to do what you want to do, and do things that are productive. So if you do productive things, high quality work, there's endless demand. So I always tell young people, you know, I almost never went to college myself. I never even took the SAT, because I wanted to be a skilled tradesman. I wanted to be an electrician, but I couldn't be one because I didn't have a family member in the union. So then I had to go to college, which was a community college. But anyway, that aside, I tell young people, do things like just get a trade. Once you get a trade and know something, put a shingle out. Working for the corporate man or the corporations is a sucker's game, because eventually you're going to get older and they're going to lay you off. And then, and it's better to do things on your own. It's harder at first, but it's better. And so the ticket to that is really learning a trade that's useful, where there's demand, and then you do the very best job you can. And if you do a good job, you'll never miss a meal. There's endless demand. So, and I have another saying too, is I never cut corners. So if you're going to take on a job, you always take on a job to the maximum quality. I mean, you could make yourself nuts, maybe go crazy making it too maximum, but you'd always do things to the highest quality available. And if you come up to a place where you can cut a corner, you don't. And if you do that, you have things that endure. One of the things I love about old buildings is they were built to last. When was the last time you saw Walmart built to last? None of the buildings being built, the schools today, they don't last 30 years. Nothing's built to last, but these old buildings are built to last. And I think most of the stuff in life, if in your own personal efforts, should be with that goal, is to build things that matter and what last.
Yeah, I definitely like that ethos. And I think that that is a very Southern ethos. And you have such a Southern
So you're
spirit.
saying I've become a Southerner?
Absolutely. I
I
mean,
don't have the accent. I gotta change my, put some cotton in my mouth or something.
I've heard people smarter than me that say being Southern is a state of mind. There were plenty of great quote unquote Southerners that weren't from here. Like I think of Lewis Ginter, who moved to Richmond from like Philadelphia or something, back in the 1840s or 1850s. And he became one of the biggest philanthropists for the city of Richmond, built gardens, all sorts of things. Um, you know, uh, he was a big supporter of the Confederacy. So he wasn't from Richmond, but he was a Richmonder because he loved it. And he always did what you do. He used his resources and time to beautify the thing he loved, which he considered home. So, and then you have the rebel spirit too, because you don't like being told what to do. So, you already got that going for you.
Yeah, that's true. I am a rebel. But I think you become part of a community when you do things for the community that matter.
Yes.
That's probably the definition of how to be part of a community. And sometimes, like in the community here, there was parts of it that resisted it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I'm doing something that matters.
Right.
And the jobs that restoration is providing, the income that's flowing into this place because of that, the lives that change. For example, I have a rule on the people doing the work, restoring the building, the actual workers are all local guys. They're all from local area. And I have a mission on that. I've got the contractor and that's how we're doing it. So if you go down there and see the guys working on there, some of them look kind of unruly. They have a lot of them have these giant beards and stuff and really weird hairdos. But they're nice guys, and it's their town, it's their hotel. And I have to tell you, the sense of pride they have in restoring the landmark is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, some of these guys are local. They never went to college. Some of them were in, jail for one thing or another. This, in some ways, might be the first time where they're actually lauded in the community because they get a lot of attention. Right. And I think that pride and that thing is just, it's worth more than money in the bank.
Well, it's like you said, don't cut corners. And if you're going to do something, do it right. So, hiring the local people, I think that's just a beautiful thing. And then it's helping that area. I have not been to West Jefferson in ages. I think the last time was about 20 years ago when I went canoeing from that point. I guess we launched from West Jefferson to go down the river, but I haven't been there in ages. I'm going to have to stop by the hotel and check it out and meet you in person next time you're there. But what is the status of the building now? What stage are y'all at?
I'm more than halfway done, and we're going into the interior design phase of it. So we're doing things with lighting and sound and just interior design. And we've got a certain vibe. The building itself has a vibe. You don't have to do much to make it. You don't have to put much lipstick on it to make it look really good.
Right.
Because it already looks good, but a few little touches of taste and elegance, and it was always elegant. And that's another thing in Appalachia. Everybody thinks everybody is just some backward hick, but you look at this building and it's a sophisticated building. And then you look at the old pictures. Everybody had suits. The women were dressed. The women were wearing hats. They had beautiful shoes and stockings. So, the derogatory view of the mountain area and the Appalachian area is really at odds with reality, because there was in fact culture and elegance. And the Appalachian culture is, in my way of seeing, I've traveled all over America, it's one of the strongest cultures in America in terms of continuing, and it continues to this day. They're lovely, lovely people. Lovely people.
Yeah, and strong, I think, is an important word too. It's not just that the culture is strong and so deeply immersed there that even if you don't realize it's there, it is, but the people are strong.
Yeah,
They have, they're tough as nails.
I get to troll them though. As a Yankee, I troll them all the time, and the way I troll them is, yeah, it's snowing out and it's bad weather, and they're not gonna. I say, wait a minute, I thought you were mountain men and tough.
Yeah.
And a little bit of snow, you're not going to show up to work. And and then they go crazy, and then they show up to work.
There you go.
But I get to act like the Yankee out of towner that's supposedly soft and everything. And I call them mountain men that need to mountain up.
There you go.
It's fun.
Well, good-natured ribbing. Nobody can say that's not a fun thing to do. Well, so is there anything we can do to help support you other than just thinking this is a great thing, or come to visit it when it's done? How and I'll put your Facebook page. The West Jefferson Hotel does have its own Facebook page, which I assume you manage. But what else besides following the page and then coming to visit it when it's done?
Well, when you have people in their communities, and I know you're southern facing group, you look around the towns, and all these towns at one time were thriving, and you look at the old buildings, and it tells the story that they were not impoverished. Many of the towns are kind of like being forgotten. Mm-hmm. A few weeks ago, we went and picked up a new puppy in Alabama, and my wife and I, we drive a long way for dogs, by the way. My wife and I were driving around, and there were some places it was like a wasteland where they had been thriving, but it's not anymore. So what I would say to people is pay attention to the old historic buildings, and in any way, whatever way you can, try to preserve them, because that is your community. And once they go, they cannot be rebuilt. Modern building codes will not allow a building like the West Jefferson Hotel to be built today. So once they're gone, they're gone. And then the next thing you know, your town is just a drive-through drugstore.
Yep.
I mean, and that's what goes there. And that's what would have happened to the West Jefferson Hotel had it not been saved. It would have been a drive-through drugstore.
Or the Dollar Generals. I mean, it's like every southern town has 10 of them, and they have horrible prices to begin with. And it's so sad. And I think a lot of towns not only have places been abandoned, but I think there are still some places that just never recovered from reconstruction. And so there's so much beauty there that just needs to be tapped into. And I love the fact that you're doing that, and you're doing it so well. And especially when there's resistance, you don't give up easily. And, this horrible culture we live in, that's complete brutalist destruction all around us, and you're building things up, not from the ground up. You're taking these diamonds in the rough and restoring them. So I thank you for coming on and explaining this, because I think it's such an inspirational white pill, and we need those.
There's one other thing too, for your younger parts of your audience, or anybody for that matter. Don't give up on the rural areas. Mm-hmm. You can live way cheaper in a rural area. I grow my own food. We live incredibly cheaply compared to the city. There's jobs to be had in rural areas. There's land. They're lovely. They're safe. And I wish young people would see it for what it is, that it is kind of a new, there's a coming era of a new form of homesteading, mm-hmm. where you really basically resettle these lands again, because they're just empty. And there's a great opportunity for young people if they just move back and just
Yeah.
start working the land again and working a trade in the area, as I said, they'll never miss a meal and they'll have a mighty fine life.
Yeah.
So
And
I just, it's just sitting there.
yeah,
It's a
and not
great
for
asset.
long, because I think the powers that be want to, urban versus rural, they kind of want to make that escape valve for people, or people just getting back to their roots, not be as easy as it once was. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to look into that sooner rather than later. And yeah, I think tapping back into where you came from, because that's where my mother-in-law is from. Everybody moves to Charlotte, and it's just senior citizens up there, and there's very few young people where she lives. And I think those places are just screaming out for young families and for people to come and build things and do good
Yeah, the
work.
young families would do quite well. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just that people think conventionally that they have to get the college degree
Yeah.
and then move on South Side Charlotte and live in some dumpy, boxy looking apartment
Yeah.
that's 7 or 8 stories tall
And
and take
create
the
debt.
light.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and take the light rail to work and to the bar after work.
Ugh. Well, that does not sound fun to me. But we are out of time, Mr. Beck. It has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I wish you all the luck. And once you get your next 2 projects underway, which I'm sure you probably have some ideas about those already, but we'll have to talk about that next time. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Rebecca, and I look forward to meeting you someday, giving you a tour of the West Jefferson Hotel, meeting your lovely family.
Oh, well, we can't
Thank you.
wait. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
see you, bye.